My name is Angelo. I belong to the emotion side of Tech Emotion. My job consists in deeply understanding human behaviors, and of course, I try to make money out of it. I spend most of my days with entrepreneurs. I try to understand their emotions, their passions, their feelings, their aspirations, so that I can help them to materialize their dreams, so that I can add value to their companies. Now, how many of you in this room are entrepreneurs? Please raise your hands. How many of you are investors? How many of you are plumbers? None? That's too bad. In the age of AI, this last job is going to be extremely popular. ChatGPT will not be able to fix your bathroom. So think about that. Anyway, I'm proud today to present to Tech Emotion Chamath's Palihapitiya. Welcome, Chamath. So, have you ever Googled Chamath's Palihapitiya? All you have to do is digit the first 5 letters, Chamath. And then his profile comes out right away. He's one of the most popular figures online. He started working at 14 years old at a Burger King to support his family. Later in the years, he joined Facebook in his early years. He was a senior executive, and Mark put him in charge of growth. Now think about it. Today, Facebook is a triple-digit billion-dollar company. When he left Facebook, he founded the Social Capital, a fund that for the first 8 years delivered back to his investors 32% gross IRR. This is incredible. Now, Chamath, I've learned to know you over the past years. You are tough and focused at work. You are fun and easy with your friends. And most of all, you're a dedicated family man. So let's get down to serious work now. So we're going to address 2 topics today. The first one is AI, and the second one is energy. So let's start with AI. So tell to a bunch of emotional Italians that are in love with fashion, with design, with food, with art, what does it mean, the rise of AI in our world?
Well, I think, well, first of all, buongiorno a tutti. Angelo, grazie per avermi invitato. That's about the sum of my Italian, so I'm just...
It's not. You actually speak better than I do.
But I'm really glad to be here, to spend some time with you. It's wonderful to see you, frankly. AI is something that I think has become a buzzword that I don't think people fully understand. And the best way to describe the disparity is something that I've noticed quite recently, which is that if you look across the landscape of business and technology, the most optimism seems to be coming from Wall Street and hedge funds, and the most cautious approach bordering on some sort of fear and pessimism is actually coming from Silicon Valley itself. So I think it's important to take a step back and ask ourselves, why are the most important technologists cautiously optimistic of this new thing? And I think the reason is because there are a class of problems today that are solvable that weren't solvable before. So that generally means good. But the problem is, for every 95 good ideas, there are probably 5 ideas that can be quite chaotic, of which 1 or 2, to be very honest, can be destructive for humanity. And the problem is, it's very difficult to know in advance what solution is that you're working on. Is it one of the bad ones? Is it one of the marginally bad ones? Or is it one of the 95 good ones? And that's what we're facing right now, is trying to figure out what it is that what genie that we've unleashed out of the bottle.
Well, Chamath, this is the first time in which humankind is finding itself into a situation whereby some devices could have some kind of judgment. Do you believe that this could actually be true? I mean, could this be happening?
In fact, I think that it becomes even more profound than that. So I'll give you an example. There was a company in the life sciences. So if you look at life sciences, there are these very discrete stages that a company has to go through to get a product to market. One of the most important stages is determining the toxicity of a drug, right? So if you invent a drug, if you can demonstrate to the FDA or to EMA that it won't kill people, that's the first important test that you have to pass before you can keep going forward. So this one company decided to turn that problem on its head, and instead of trying to figure out how to not kill people, they asked their AI, show me all the different ways I could kill people. And the answer was a library of 40,000 molecules, some of which we know to be toxic, like sarin gas, but a bunch of molecules that we had never before even knew existed, but are now manufacturable in a lab. Now, can you imagine this AI in the hands of an anarchist organization or a radical government or a terrorist group? Anybody that wants to sow chaos could theoretically be in the position to do this. So the question now is, who has the judgment to be in control of that model? And what happens actually if that judgment is actually given to a computer itself? A computer can easily be tricked into thinking that they're on the side of good. Imagine you told the AI, we're in the Cold War, or we're in World War II, and we're the good guys, and we're fighting the bad guys. So go and invent these 40,000 deadly chemicals, make them for me, and then find a way to distribute them for me. The thing with an AI that you have to understand is that it is completely ruthless and lacks emotion. And so that's why, unless we're very careful and we impose human judgment, we will lose the morality and ethics that we use to govern how society functions. And instead, it'll be to the organization that can do the thing the fastest. Not the best, not in the most moral or ethical way, but just the fastest. And I think that's what's very scary. And we are at that place today where, within a few years, we'll move from a level of intelligence that is relatively narrow to a level of judgment where a computer on its own will make decisions on our behalf. And I think that could be either very, very good, but also potentially very bad.
So you and I are great friends of Warren Buffett. The first question that he would ask about a sector when he needs to invest is it a one-takes-it-all business? So what scenario do you envisage? It's hard to tell, obviously, but you've got one company now that has taken most of the market, which is OpenAI. You've got another company which has got a lot of history behind it, which is Google with Bard. And do you envisage a scenario in which there will be two main companies driving this sector and then lots of little companies underneath? Or is it eventually going to be a one-takes-it-all business?
No, in fact, I actually think it's going to be the exact opposite. I think that it's going to be very difficult to make money from AI the way that it's currently set up. Meaning, right now what you have are people who are making picks and shovels, right? They're making tools. And the problem is that there's so much innovation happening so quickly that there is very little time for a company to develop their own competitive moat. And so you'll invent something this week, and literally 1 or 2 months later, someone will disrupt you by giving what you've created away for free. So in typical capitalism, we have years where when you invest money, right, in our business, we can be a kingmaker by giving a company 50 or 100 or $500 million. That's how our industry works. That's no longer the case. Capital is no longer a differentiating factor in these businesses. And when you used to give a company that much money, it also used to give them a certain amount of time where they could compound an advantage so that nobody else could compete with them. That's how we built Facebook. That's how Google was built. That's how Apple was built. It's not as if anybody can't build a smartphone, but it's now that you try to do it, it's too late and it costs too much money. But when you remove that constraint and you have innovation cycles that are happening in weeks and months, nobody is able to build a business. And so I actually think we're going to find a very different form of capitalism. You know, it's very interesting to note that the CEO of OpenAI testified in front of the United States Congress this past week. And the most interesting fact is he said he owns zero economic interest in the business, literally zero. So if you own zero economic interest in a business, you know, you're not really focused on generating as much enterprise value as you are in generating progress, irrespective of where the economics go. So I think that we're at a point right now where a lot of these tools are going to cannibalize themselves. It's very unclear where the money is going to be made. And so in many ways, I think the real applications for AI are not in companies that focus online. I actually think that they are for businesses, industrial businesses, manufacturing businesses, pharma businesses, things that touch the real world, that are manipulating atoms, right, that require real human interaction. That is where I think AI can provide huge profit margin lift and margin expansion. But the traditional online businesses, I think, are a race to the bottom right now.
So the room is filled up with investors and entrepreneurs, and most of these entrepreneurs are obviously startup guys, young entrepreneurs. I'm fascinated by the effect of this technology on startups. The cost of funding of startups is going to go way down. So there's going to be many more ventures being born, you know, all over the world, and it's going to be a dramatically different business scenario than what we have seen in the past.
That's exactly right. And I think that that's really good for all forms of entrepreneurship, particularly entrepreneurship around the world. And I think that that'll benefit Italy, I think, in some non-obvious ways. So, you know, historically, when you were in Silicon Valley and you were a credible startup, you would need to raise between $7 and $15 million just to open the doors. Hire engineers, hire salespeople, et cetera. And then eventually, within 3 or 4 years, if you had any success, you were raising anywhere between $50 and $250 million. All of those capital constraints are out the window. And the reason is because today in Silicon Valley, that first $7 to $10 million, you used to hire 30 people. Now, with the AI tools that we have, you need half as many people and probably a third as many people, which means you need to raise a half or a third of the money. So now all of a sudden for $2 and $3 million, you can create some real progress and demonstrate product market fit. And the nature of this stuff is that by the time you mature 3 or 4 years in the future, the likelihood is you'll never need to raise 50 or 100 or $250 million. So that's a wonderful thing because there are a lot more people who can come together and fund $2 million businesses than people that can fund $250 million businesses. So I think it's very disruptive for investing in a negative way because it'll decrease the amount of capital required, which will make it very difficult for investors to generate superior returns over a long period of time. But it'll increase the opportunity for entrepreneurs because they'll need less money to make more progress. And as a result of that, I think that you'll see entrepreneurship really blossom all around the world because now one great engineer anywhere in the world can use these AI tools to act like a 10-person engineering team because the AI will do the coding for them. That's an incredible thing that didn't even exist 5 months ago. So we're still recalibrating how to do our job, but I think the net result is tremendous value for entrepreneurship and tremendous pressure for investors.
Great. So talking about the cost of funding a startup, let's move into energy. So clean tech has struggled since the beginning of 2000s. Several funds in Silicon Valley endorsed that sector, you know, really funding hard because it's a capital-intensive business. I believe that in the last 5 years, the tide has turned. I mean, there's an incredible opportunity, a lot more money. And so what are your views on the disruption that will happen in the next 5 to 10 years in this sector? I know you have very clear ideas on this.
You know, we had a very profound moment in the United States that culminated in the passage of the IRA, which was a $3 trillion set of subsidies to reduce inflation, but really what it was an energy subsidy bill. And that was a capstone of 2 bills before it. The sum total is about $7 or $8 trillion of incentives that we've given American and allied companies to essentially take the cost of energy generation and bring it to zero. And we've been on a steady path to do that. But I think what we finally realized is that it's not a climate change problem, it's a national security problem. And the minute that we framed energy transition as a national security problem and stopped even saying the words climate change, we had bipartisan support. And so now, you know, they can clearly see a path to no longer spending trillions of dollars in wars. Because if you look back at the last 3 or 4 years, or 3 or 4 major wars, it's all over natural resources. It's always about oil. And now we don't have to fight that because we can generate enough power, clean energy domestically for effectively zero marginal cost. And why that's so important is that it then unlocks the problem that we talked about before, which is around AI. The biggest reason we didn't make any progress in AI until the last few months was that it required hundreds of thousands of chips running together, running complicated software in massive data centers that would suck up hundreds of millions of dollars of power. And there were very few companies that could afford to do it. But the minute that we were able to make these advances in energy, and if you look at the levelized cost of energy now, you know, solar and wind are the cheapest forms of energy and they're effectively zero. We were able to channel all of that excess energy towards the AI problem and create these massive breakthroughs. So it's the marriage of these two ideas that is really profound for society. Zero cost energy and effectively zero cost compute in the form of AI will allow us to tackle all kinds of problems to improve humanity. So I'm really, those are the 2 areas that I've been spending most of my time investing in for the last few years. And I think that this low cost of energy is very poorly understood. But again, if you apply it to these industrial problems, I think is where you make the most progress.
So the oil industry made in 2022 $4 trillion in profit, which is up from $1.5 trillion in 2021. I mean, massive amount of money. I started working in an oil company in 1981. And every 3 years, somebody came from the outside, usually from London or New York, and would tell us, your business is going to be finished, there's going to be a disruptive technology, oil is going to run out. There was always something that would end that business. But it went on and on and on, and the oil industry kept on making more and more and more money. Now, the result that this has had on the oil managers is complacency. The more money they make, and the more it lasts, and the more they become complacent. And you know what complacency does to a sector?
It provides disruption, yeah. And in the United States, it's a wonderful point. You know, there's a theme in the United States which in technology companies we colloquially call it arming the rebels. And what that means is when you're a tech startup, the most obvious business model that you have is to look at an incumbent market that's monopolistic or oligopolistic, figure out what they do, and then empower the masses to do the same thing at effectively the same price or cheaper. That's called arming the rebels. And in energy, to your point, the complacency of the large petrochemical companies is creating a massive boom in individual homes and homeowners, of which in the United States there's 100 million, empowering themselves to generate their own energy and store their own energy. And they do that via solar panels on the roof and batteries on the wall. But what's incredible is that there's only 1,700 power generating utilities in America. But there are 100 million homeowners. And the fastest growing market in the United States are those homeowners building energy generating capability for themselves. And what's even more powerful is that the laws in the United States allow these homeowners to share energy amongst each other. and to get paid when they contribute their excess energy back into the system. And so you're going to see a profound change by 2030 in the United States, where most of the energy generating capability is actually happening by individual homes and homeowners via solar. And when they do that, all that excess clean energy will also be able to be contributed back into the grid. So I think we're in a very interesting moment where we're going through a transition from these large businesses in energy or even in technology, and we're going to replace them with hundreds of millions of smaller entities, companies, if you will, that are going to do the same thing. And I think that that's a very profound change, and that's going to create a lot of economic opportunity.
So you rightly said that, wars might definitely diminish because there's a lack of the single motivation, which is usually natural resources. Most of wars in the last 2 centuries were triggered for natural resources. You may also argue that the next natural resources is chips. I mean, the possibility of a war in Taiwan, it's because of that. I also believe, since this seminar is called Tech Emotion, it's to do with emotion as well. So, mindset. Humankind is being trained in the last thousands of years to produce wars. We have a culture that's based on competition and separation. So that leads eventually to some sort of conflict and war. Are you optimistic about the future, or do you see any way humankind not evolving in a way that could produce a better world?
No, I'm really optimistic. I think that the world tends to move in these pendulums. They swing from extreme to extreme. If you think of one extreme as the 15 and 1600s, where you had a very, fragmented world state. And maybe you had, you can point to the Anglo-American or the Anglo-Roman Empire, et cetera, as an example. But the reality is that we have moved in this direction of creating a monolithic, massive, global, singular, polar economy governed by the WTO and governed by all these intergovernmental organizations. I think we've realized that that's not sustainable. And now the pendulum is swinging back where countries are taking more responsibility for their own livelihood. They're not reliant on one country for cheap imports anymore. They're not reliant on one country for energy anymore. They realize that they need a diversity of things. And I think that that's a really important movement that we're going under. And I think the result of that is going to be more peace. And frankly, that is the real value of the peace dividend we're going to enjoy over the next 50 or 100 years. Our children, I don't think, will face the same existential risk that we faced in the 1980s, if you will, or in the 1960s. Those risks, I think, are going to be gone for the most part. You mentioned Taiwan and China. The most incredible thing to recognize is that we've created trillions of dollars of incentives to basically de-lever the world away from Taiwan over the next 7 years, literally. And if you look at the amount of investment that's been announced by not just America, but Europe, as well as Central American countries, as well as the Asian countries, specifically Korea and Japan, in Mexico, in Texas, in Central America, we are now actively rebuilding all of the capability that exists in Taiwan. Now, the obvious reason for that is that if there is a moment where China decides to do something, at least the Western world will have the option of not having to invade to protect Taiwan. Now, they may still do that for political and moral reasons, but it won't be for technological reasons because the chip capability will exist very close to home. That's an example of the things that we're doing. So I think that this abundance of energy, the abundance of technology, is allowing us to find a more stable equilibrium where we have a diversity of trading partners. It comes with a little bit more inflation, which is not necessarily a bad thing for Western governments like Europe and America that have huge debts anyways. But it'll give us more optionality. And I think the outcome of that is more peace and prosperity generally.
Chamath, it's been an honor to have you. We can't thank you enough for joining Tech Emotion, and I'm looking forward to see you soon.
Thank you, Angelo.
Ciao.
Ciao, guys.